Kislev, which makes tomorrow Tes Kislev, which is the birthday and the Yahrzeit Hilula of the Mitteler Rebbe. And it makes Thursday Yud Kislev, which is the Chag HaGeula of the Mitteler Rebbe. So we're talking about the Mitteler Rebbe. Talking about the Mitteler Rebbe. That's our topic. And as I always do in these classes, I don't repeat the same thing 3 times. I did Seminary Beis yesterday. I'm doing Seminary Beis after this. I do in order. So yesterday I did the first part of the story. Today I'm doing the middle of the story, and then I'll continue the story today in Seminary Beis. The Mitteler Rebbe's Nesius was very short. It was only 15 years, the shortest of any Rebbe.
15?
1-5, yeah. But it was unbelievably intense, incredibly intense. Meaning, in 15 years, it was a whole generation. By the time he passed away, he had created a body of people who, when the Tzemach Tzedek became a Rebbe, had a hard time. Because the Tzemach Tzedek I guess in some ways closer to the Alter Rebbe. He was different than the Mitteler Rebbe in substantial enough a way for them to have been identified, to be branded with the Mitteler Rebbe in a grand total of 15 years. Some will tell you that part of the reason the Mitteler Rebbe was able to create a whole generation in 15 years was because the truth is, when the Alter Rebbe was alive, the Mitteler Rebbe almost acted like a Rebbe. When the Alter Rebbe was alive, the Mitteler Rebbe said Chassidus. When the Alter Rebbe was alive, the Mitteler Rebbe said Chassidus with his own explanations, with the Alter Rebbe's sanction, the Alter Rebbe's permission. The relationship between the Alter Rebbe and the Mitteler Rebbe is very unusual. We don't have, no other father-son Rebbe combo has the kind of relationship that the Alter Rebbe had and the Mitteler Rebbe had. The Alter Rebbe and the Mitteler Rebbe had a standard argument. The Alter Rebbe used to say to the Mitteler Rebbe, I'm greater than you because my son is a Rebbe. And the Mitteler Rebbe used to say to the Alter Rebbe, I'm greater than you because my father was a Rebbe. In the last years of the Alter Rebbe's life, and that could be 10 or 11 years, if you came to the Alter Rebbe and asked him about Ruchnis, about davening, about learning, about Avodas Hashem, the standard answer was, go to my Rebbe, geh zu mein Rebbe. And when the Alter Rebbe said, go to my Rebbe, he meant his son. So the Mitteler Rebbe, in a lot of ways, you could say, acted almost like a Rebbe during the lifetime of his father, and he had a following. People were drawn to the Mitteler Rebbe. But the actual Nesius of the Mitteler Rebbe was a grand total of 15 years. 50 years. Of all the 7 Chabad Rebbeim, the furthest Rebbe from Dinim Tachtonim was the Mitteler Rebbe. I don't think the Mitteler Rebbe made Dinim Tachtonim, although I'm going to tell you some stuff that are quite Tachtonim dik. The Mitteler Rebbe took hundreds of people and brought them up to Gan Eden. The Mitteler Rebbe's Nesius was a whirlwind. He gave Chassidus in such an unbelievable way, such an amazing way, such a generous way. And you know, for a Rebbe to walk into a room and say Chassidus is not a big deal. But for a Rebbe to walk into a room and say Chassidus and the people able to listen, that's a big deal. And the Mitteler Rebbe had an army of hundreds of men, maybe thousands, whose concentration was so well developed that they could listen for 5-6 hours to a Maimer Chassidus. Not a story, not a movie, a Maimer Chassidus. And like the time didn't pass. He created his Talmidim, he created his Chassidim, he raised them up to an extraordinarily high level. And in many, many ways, Chabad Chassidus peaked by the Mitteler Rebbe. It was not a Chassidus that was for everybody. You had to be a very strong mind and to pay a very high price. But in terms of the Chabad aspect of it, people using their minds to get close to God, what the Mitteler Rebbe did was unbelievable. The Frierdiker Rebbe writes 2 statements about the Mitteler Rebbe's Chassidim that are remarkable. Statement number 1. What the Mitteler Rebbe gave his Chassidim, no Rebbe gave. What the Mitteler Rebbe gave his Chassidim, no Rebbe gave. And statement number 2. The Mitteler Rebbe's Chassidim did not need Mashiach, because they had Mashiach and the Chassidus of the Mitteler Rebbe. That was the kind of time it was. It was an incredibly heightened time, incredibly intense. And the people hung on, and there were many of them. Hundreds and hundreds of men, maybe thousands, I don't know the numbers, who were real Talmidim and Chassidim of the Mitteler Rebbe. They swam in Chassidus like a fish swims in water. It was their world. And there were a lot of things the Mitteler Rebbe did to make this happen. There were a lot of things the Mitteler Rebbe did to make this happen. Number 1, he was singularly dedicated. The Mitteler Rebbe had one issue. When he became a Rebbe, one thing that mattered to him. There were 2 Chassidim meet in the street, they should talk Yechudi Allah, talk about Chassidus. Everything else was secondary to this interest. The Chassidim should be so busy, should be so excited, so enamored, so tuned in to understanding Haskalah L'Kiyus, understanding godliness, that nothing else in the world mattered. And he achieved that. He achieved that. And he did a lot of things to make this happen. One of the things that he did was he lowered the age of people who were able to learn. By the Alter Rebbe, if you want to learn Chassidus, you probably had to be married. And you probably had to be quite a Talmud Chacham before you were allowed to learn Chassidus. Maybe they let kids learn Tanya. But Chassidus Chabad by the Alter Rebbe was only for grown-ups. The Mitteler Rebbe let much younger people come to Lubavitch. I mean young married men, and they probably get married in their teens in those days, but they were also very learned. And he invited younger people to come to Lubavitch to benefit from the derech of Chabad that he was teaching. In addition, you came to Lubavitch and stayed as long as you want. But the Alter Rebbe, you came for 1 weekend and you had to go. You couldn't stay more than a few days. Alter Rebbe was very strict about how he ran his Chassidus. You could only come certain weeks of the year, and you could only come once a year, and only for a few days they had to leave. Alter Rebbe very much controlled the Chassidus access to him. The Mitteler Rebbe said, come and stay as long as you want. And people came. Young Bacharim, married people who were being supported by their in-laws or by their parents, they would come, they would stay in Lubavitch for months, sometimes years. And they would take in Chassidus like the Mitteler Rebbe gave, on Asher and on Avrei. But then there was a rule. When you left Lubavitch, you had to stop in every town and the Chazar Chassidus, in every town on the way home. So if you lived 100 towns from Lubavitch, you had to stop 100 times in the Chazar Ramayim. When the Chassidim were coming back from Lubavitch, they would stop at a shtetl, and they would tell the Rav, who was a Lubavitcher Chassid, or the Mashpio, who was a Lubavitcher Chassid, I'm coming from Lubavitch, and I have the Chazar Chassidus. So all the Chassidim would gather, and this young boy, sometimes 17, 18 years old, would sit in a room full of people, sometimes 2, 3, 4 times his age, and Chazar, say Chassidus. And the Chassidus by the Mitteler Rebbe wasn't 15 minutes. By the Alter Rebbe, Chassidus was 15 minutes, half an hour, 40 minutes. By the Mitteler Rebbe, it could have been several hours. But that was the rule. Every shtetl they would come, they would invite all the people, they would put this person, Meresh HaShulchan, at the head of the table, they would give him a lot of respect. He's coming from Lubavitch, he's coming from the Rebbe, and he would Chazar Chassidus. This would repeat itself again and again and again. So the Mitteler Rebbe created a mood in the Lubavitcher Chassidish world that was so Chassidus saturated, so full of learning and listening and understanding, that he created a generation of people who were obsessed, mamish obsessed, with understanding Chassidus Chabad. This was one of the techniques that he used. The Alter Rebbe, the Rivkah Rebbe, has a long story, a famous story. It's a long, long story. It's printed in English. It's printed to the Rivkah Rebbe. It's also printed in the Sefer Limud HaChassidus, I think, or Teres HaChassidus, about a Chassid by the name of Rabbi Kushiel Lepler. You know the Kushiel Lepler because he's mentioned twice in the Hayem Yom. Once it says that Kushiel Lepler is daven Shachas Mincha Ma'ariv, one after the next, there's no time to stop. And the other one is that the Alter Rebbe offered him a bracha for Arichas Yomim, and he said, "Aber nicht kein Poyerish Yara, not the years of a peasant, was einayim lehem v'layiru, was nayim behem v'layishmo." You have eyes and you can't see godliness, and you have ears and you can't hear godliness. Kushiel Lepler knew 5 Rebbes. He was a chosr of the Alter Rebbe, and he saw the Rebbe Rashab. Kushiel Lepler, he got the bracha for Arichas Yomim. The Alter Rebbe gave him a bracha Yomim, but it was nishka poyerish. A bracha of Alter Rebbe was more than a bracha of Arichas Alter Rebbe was more than 90, 90 and 100. But the Mitteler Rebbe was between 80 and 90, but it's a Tzedek between 70 and 80. You got a bracha from Alter Rebbe for Arichas Rebbe lived 100 years. Kushiel Rebbe lived 100 years. But part of his story was, by the Alter Rebbe, he was a pashta guy. He was pashit. He was a retail shopkeeper. He had a store. He sold groceries. He was a retail shopkeeper. He was a simple man. He came to Alter Rebbe mostly with his heart. His brain was quite small. And by the Alter Rebbe, he became a somebody, but he became a somebody because of his heart. Nobody would have called Kushlep. The Rivkah Rebbe says Kushlep, he had a brain like a piece of wood. It just didn't go in. He was a pashut yid, but very, very bad, very hard. And then the Alter Rebbe passes away, and the Mitteler Rebbe shows up, and Kushiel Lepler is by now probably in his 30s or 40s, and a boy, half his age, I don't know, 18, 19, rolls into town, Lepler, which is a Chassidish city, and the whole community gathers in shul, and this guy starts to talk. He doesn't speak for 15 minutes, speaks for 2 hours. Kushiel Lepler paid attention to like 1 or 2 of the questions, then was lost. And the whole rest of the month, he was dizzy. He says, what's this? I've been going to the Alter Rebbe for 20 years, and this boy does better than me. When he went to the Alter Rebbe, the Chassidus was much shorter. So he was able to understand a little. This blew his mind. See, as soon as this guy finishes the Maimer, he says to this boy, you're not leaving. You're not leaving. I want to hear it again. And Kushan Lepler had real OCD, about mamish OCD, and a madrega that makes anybody at OCD cured. He didn't let the guy go for a week, 7 days. And every day this boy had to repeat the same Maimer 4 or 5 times, 3 or 4 times, Kushan Lepler. And he would sit and listen, and he didn't understand the word. And he was beside himself. He said, I don't understand, you're 17. I'm 40. How do you get this? It doesn't go into my head. So I said, I don't have to tell you. I mean, Kushalat wasn't smart enough. He wasn't smart enough. He didn't have the intelligence. So after a week, he let the poor guy go. And he turns to his wife and says, I'm going to Lubavitch, and I don't know when I'm coming back. So take care of business. And he went to the Mitteler Rebbe. He went into the Mitteler Rebbe and said to the Mitteler Rebbe, you know, I went to your father, to the Alter Rebbe. I was by Chassidus many times. I understood. He would quote a pasuk. He would ask some questions, and he would answer. Now a boy of half my age shows up in town. He says a pasuk, I got that. He asks questions, I got that. And then he starts going off into I don't know where, Atzilas, Ein Seif, Ak, and I'm lost. So the Mitteler Rebbe told you, nothing is stronger than will. Nothing is stronger than will. So the Frierdiker Rebbe explains this Eirah. The Frierdiker Rebbe said that B'derech HaTeva Kushan Lepler was not smart enough to understand Chabad. So the Mitteler Rebbe didn't tell him, your guy told Matzasa, which is the normal answer. He told him, if you're going to understand Chassidus, you're going to have to change your brain. But you do a brain transplant. And for that, you have to have will. Will with Mesidus Nefesh. So Kushan Lepler stayed in Lubavitch for 7 months. And he made the city nuts. He was a professional nudnik. Kushan Lepler was a professional nudnik. The stories about him are quite interesting. And there are also some of them are pretty scary. Because he was a big Baal Madrega. And everybody had to tell, everyone he met, say for me the Ma'ayin, say for me, say Ma'ayin again and again and again and again. He would go out of Lubavitch and he would force himself to concentrate for as long as he could. He didn't have a brain. But he was so interested, so desirous of understanding the Chassidus that he broke himself and he broke himself and he broke himself and he changed himself. The Frierdiker Rebbe said, didn't get to Shachamar, was still hard for him. But by the time the Mitteler Rebbe passed away, he was the greatest Meir of Chassidus in the world. From will, Pashat, from his Ratzon. And he would listen to the same Maimer over and over and over. He wanted so much to get it. And his head opened. His head opened. He became a master. The Frierdiker Rebbe said that the Mitteler Rebbe made a sefer for every group of Chassidim. The most difficult sefer Chassidus ever written till this day is called the Imrei Bina. It's very difficult to read. I never learned Imrei Bina. I looked at it. The Imrei Bina was written for this man, Kushan Lepler. A man who, when he was 35 years old, didn't have a brain, and the Mitteler Rebbe didn't do no favors for him, didn't do miracles. The Mitteler Rebbe said, "You want to understand? Ratzon, will," and he willed himself into being the biggest maven. He became an unbelievable expert at understanding Chassidus. And the end of the story is he lived a very long time. I mean, I just want to give you an idea what kind of guy he was, just to freak you out a little bit, okay? He was sitting in a Fabrengen. Kushan Lepler, you have to be careful. Kushan Lepler, you have to be careful. He was full of shtick. He walked around in overalls, you know what I mean? He didn't walk around with a hat and jacket. He walked around like a farmer. He wore dungarees and jeans and dirty clothes and blue shirt. He was a farmer. But he was just, his brain and his neshama were, whoa, in another place. He'd walk over to a chassid who was half his age, and he'd hit him on his shoulder and say, "What's bothering me?" And you couldn't, what do you mean, what's bothering you? He didn't tell me to bother me, leave me alone. With Kushan Lepler, you couldn't do that. I'll tell you in a minute why. The person who he asked it to, Shmuel Babarisov, said, with Kushan Lepler, you couldn't play games. When he said, "What's bothering me?" you had to guess. And you had to hedge, maybe this, until you got closer and closer and closer, till you figure out what was bothering him, and then you would talk about it. But why couldn't you play games with Kushan Lepler? So he says, I was a witness. Rabbi Shmuel Babarisov said, there was once a Fabrengen, and someone made a joke. Somebody made a joke. How terrible is a joke? Huh? It was probably a good joke, a clean joke, yeah. It was okay, it wasn't so bad. And everybody laughed. Kushan Lepler didn't get the joke. He didn't get it. And somebody told him, someone just made a joke. And he is a joke. He stood up. Chabalenge heard from Rebbe. When you said the Rebbe in those days, you meant the Alter Rebbe. I heard myself in the Alter Rebbe. Anybody who says a joke is going to be taken over by demons. That man became crazy, and he was crazy till the day he died. So with Kusher Lepler, I told he said, Chabaleng Gehed von Rebbe.
I never seen it.
As Amen says, well, just don't say it for the Kusher Lepler. But you have to be careful. And he was really weird, because in some ways he was Mamish Abuhai. He wasn't refined. He was a peasant. But his heart and his neshama and his brain were in another universe. He became the consummate expert of Chassidus. So the end of the story that's brought in the Sikha there is that the Rebbe Maharash, the fourth Rebbe of Chabad, was a young man, and he was learning in Rebina, and he didn't understand. So he went into his father, the Tzemach Tzedek, says, Tata Fashtenish, I don't understand. So the Tzemach Tzedek says to him, Rabbi Kusiya Lepler is dog, Kusha Lepler is in Lubavitch. A shailin in Rebina darf man fragen bei Rabbi Kusiya. A question in Rebina you have to ask this Chassid, because the Bible was written for him. It was written for him. So the Marash goes over to Kusha Lepler and says, like, I have questions with him, Rebina. And my father says, you're the guy to talk to. So without a hesitation, Kusha Lepler says, I do business. Nothing's for free. You want me to help you in Rebina? You got to help me first. He says, what do you want? He was a very tough customer. He says, number one, I want you to repeat for me again the Maimed Rebbe. That means the Tzemach Tzedek said Shabbos. That's number one. Number two, after you chazal the Maimed for me, I'm going to ask you questions. And you have to answer all my questions. After you chazal the Maimed, and I ask you all my questions, and you give me all my answers, then I'll help you with the Rebina. So he had no choice. So the Rebbe Marash chazal for Kusha Lepler the Maimed, and Kusha Lepler started asking questions. So the Rebbe Marash told the Rebbe Rashab almost all the questions he asked. I had to go to my father, to the Tzemach Tzedek. He says, that week I shuttled back and forth between Kusha Lepler and the Tzemach Tzedek. Kusha Lepler was older than the Tzemach Tzedek, probably by a lot. He says, because the Kusha Lepler asked me questions, I didn't know the answers, I went to my father gave me the answer. Then I went back to Kusha Lepler. And we finally got to the Imrei Bina, when I finally got to my questions, my father said to me, I want to hear everything that he tells you. Tzemach Tzedek wanted to know what the Kusha Lepler was saying also. And the Rebbe Marash told his son, the Rebbe Rashab, it was the most lucky week of my life. I was shuttling back and forth between these two people. I mean, you cannot compare Rebbe to Chassid, but it tells you who he became. This is the prototype or the archetype of the Mitteler Rebbe. To create people whose desire for understanding Chassidus was so great that the Pasha became transformed. Now another story. The Seder was that if you came to Lubavitch, on the way home, you had to stop in every city and Chazach Chassidus. That was the rule. If you're not prepared to Chazach Chassidus in every city, you're not allowed to come. So if you lived 100 miles from Lubavitch, how many shtetl did you have along the way? Whatever, yeah. What if you lived 1,000 miles from Lubavitch? You had to stop in every city along the way when there was Jews or Chazach Chassidus. There was a Chassid who came from Romania. Now, I don't know where Romania is, but it's very far away from Russia, from white Russia. It's at the bottom of Europe, Eastern Europe, yeah. His name was Moshe Yitzchak Miyasi. The Moshe Yitzchak Miyasi, he lived 110 years. You're about to find out why. On where he lives, they made for him an oil. Where he lived, look at him. He was a Chabad Chassid. He used to go to the Alter Rebbe. He used to go to the Mitteler Rebbe. He was someone else Tzedek also. He was Adam Gadol B'Yosef. How he found Chabad, I don't know, because he lived very far away. But he would travel to Lubavitch. It was a long trip. Anyway, he came to Lubavitch and he went home. On the way home, he had to stop in every city. Problem is, not every place he came, he was so welcome. There were other Chassidish groups that were not into the Chabad thing. They didn't like it. They felt it was wrong and all the rest. But, Mitzvah B'Oisi, he would stop in every town. He'd find a little shtibel. He'd go in and Chazach Chassidus and hope he got up when they stoned him. He came to the city of Apta. Have you heard of Apt? Have you ever heard of the Apta Rav? Rabbi Yeshua Heschel of Apt? He was a very, very, very big tzaddik. A very, very big tzaddik. And he lived 87 years. He was about the same age as the Alter Rebbe. He passed away at the same time as the Mitteler. It was Meirach Yom. He was a big tzaddik. And he was dead set against Chabad. He was very against the Alter Rebbe and Chabad. But he was a big tzaddik. Upon him was a tzaddik gomer. The Moshe Yitzchak Miyasi came to Apt. He went to the Alter Rebbe Beis and he sat on the Chazach Chassidus Chabad. Why? He had no choice. People gathered and he's speaking. Who walks in the middle? The Apta Rav, who was fire and brimstone against Chabad, and he sees a Chabad Chassid sitting in his Beis Medrash, chazing Chabad Chassidus, and he got really upset, and he says, Hagam lich peshes amal ke'imi baboyes, you want to take over my queen in my own house? And he cursed him. Du wirst nicht moise stolze, you're going to die before the year is out, you're not going to live a year. Now, a curse from Apta Rav, you could dig a grave, put your pajamas and go to sleep, it's finished. It was real. He was very afraid. He turned around, Went back to Lubavitch, and he ran to the Mitteler and says, Rebbe, I was just doing what you said. I mean, Mistami, you could have been a little more politically correct, but don't tell anybody that. He said, I was doing what the Rebbe said. The Rebbe said, after Chazal Chassidus in every shul, I came to after Chazal Chassidus and after Rebbe Mikishol. So the Mitteler Rebbe lowered his head, and he raised his head, and he said to him in Yiddish, Du wirst der überleben, you'll survive him. Then he lowered his head a second time. Du wirst seine Kinder überleben, you'll survive his children. And then he lowered his head a third time. And he said, Du wirst seine Einiklach überleben, you'll survive his grandchildren. And the guy went around twice, you understand? He missed his stop, he went 110 years. The Meise mit Mitteler Rebbe. Why? Because he Chazal Chassidus. The Mitteler Rebbe's life was a Chassidim shel Chazal Chassidus, and this was the culture that he created. It was a world of brainos, mamish. People who were so busy in their head with understanding of Akus. Forget about doing Avedas. Their whole Nesius was understanding Chassidus. You know, the Friedrich writes in the Buddha an interesting thing. That the Alter Rebbe Gemont Herz, the Mitteler Rebbe Gemont Cup. The Alter Rebbe wanted from Chassidim their heart. The Mitteler Rebbe wanted from Chassidim their brain. Now, understand the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim were on a much higher level than the Mitteler Rebbe's. They really were. The way I see it, and I could be wrong, but the way I see it, the Alter Rebbe's Chassidim were so great that they were actually normal. If you would meet them, you wouldn't be a Meshuggah. They were normal. They davened the whole day and they ran a business. There was no stira. They were complete people. They were giants. The Mitteler Rebbe's Chassidim were like, forgive me for using a mashal from today, like the claw of a crab. You know, in one way they were giants, and every other way they were not necessarily so great. But so when you say that quote, the Alter Rebbe wanted from Chassidim heart, it means he wanted their heart also. The Mitteler Rebbe wanted Chassidim's brain, and they gave him their brains. Why did they give him their brains? He raised them up to such a higher level of understanding Chassidus that it was extraordinary. I had a teacher many, many years ago. He came from Russia. His name was David Mishalov, and I'm mentioning his name. He was my teacher. It was Chassidim. So he heard stories in Russia. And one of the stories that he told us in class, he was trying to describe to us the Mitteler Rebbe's Chassidim. So he told us there was a Chassid of the Mitteler Rebbe who was putting on his shoes. And he put on one shoe, and he picked up the other shoe by the shoelace to put it on, and he started thinking of Chassidus. 6 hours later, he was still holding the shoe. He forgot where he was. His mind wandered away. And most people, when their mind wanders away to no place. His mind wandered away to Arach and Atik, to Achas Hashem, I don't know what. 6 hours later, he was still holding the shoe, was dangling between his fingers.
Who was it? Who was this?
I don't know the name. He told us another story, that there was a chassid from the Mitteler Rebbe who was standing near an oven. And he was standing against the wall, had his hands against the wall, and he went off into this Vegas. The Vada got cold in the house, so they brought the goyim, they put wood into the furnace, and they put the fire on. The house became very hot. But the oven wall, which was made of brick, became fiery hot. And he had his hands against this brick, and he didn't feel it. When he woke up from his chassidus, his hands were baked to the oven. They couldn't get it off. Because Kol's man, he was vadveket, he didn't feel pain. And they had to cool down the oven to get his hand off. The stone. There's a chassid, not a chassid. Because this was the degree to which the Chassidim of the Mitteler Rebbe were transformed by him. You see, if you're a smart guy and you have a lot of smart stuff to say, that's not a big deal. If you're a smart guy and not as smart to say, and you have people who you teach how to listen, that's the Mitteler Rebbe. Thousands of men, hundreds of for sure, probably thousands, who were with him on this unbelievable Chabad journey. It's unbelievable. It really is amazing. I did another story, which I didn't hear from David Mishalov. There was once the Mitteler saying a Maimach Chassidus, and he was pushing him. And the guy broke his leg. His leg snapped. As long as the Rebbe talked, he didn't know. And you know what happens to a leg that's broken, that you stand on it? I don't want to think. When the Mitteler Rebbe finished, he started screaming from terrible agony, but as long as the Rebbe talked, he didn't feel pain. He didn't feel pain. And the end of this is, there's so much to tell, but the end of this is a very interesting thing. The Mitteler Rebbe was tried. He was arrested at the end of his life. And he was tried as a common criminal. The Mitteler Rebbe was accused of stealing money, basically. What they call in the world of people who want to sound smart, because no one knows, financial improprieties. What does improprieties mean? No one has to know. Financial improprieties. But they accused the Mitteler Rebbe of extorting money from his Chassidim and using them for himself. in a way which was really unethical. That was the Kiddush. It was really disgusting. And it came from a few Muslim people, master of the Mitteler Rebbe. There were his family members who blackmailed him for money, whatever the Friede brought him. But it was a really ugly accusation. It was a really ugly accusation. And the whole story, how the Mitteler Rebbe got out of it, I mean, I'm not going to tell it to you now, but it's part of the story that has to be told. But they needed a character witness. You need someone to come in and testify that the Mitteler Rebbe was Naganav. On the grubber sense, you know. I mean, sometimes the person makes a mistake and, you know, money doesn't ends up in his pocket. But then there's a person who makes a living as a thief. And that's how they describe the Mitteler Rebbe as a man who made a living at the expense of poor people. The poor people, he took their money, he's living like a king. They really made it look ugly. So they needed a character witness. So it was a goyish professor named Habenthal. It was a goy, no Jewish blood. But he was a big intellectual, a very smart guy, and he knew Yiddish because he grew up amongst Jews. And he lived in Vitebsk. He lived in the city where the Mitteler Rebbe was tried. He heard, years before, that there's a rabbi, a rabbi, who speaks philosophy for hours, and that the people who are listening to him can concentrate so long that if a guy is holding his beard, he doesn't move for hours, holding his side of his head. It was described to him as enchantment. You know, this rabbi talks philosophy, he's not telling stories. And hundreds of men are listening with such concentration that they don't move. He didn't believe it. So he got into a wagon and he drove from Vitebsk to Lubavitch on a Shabbos. He was a goy. It was a hot summer Shabbos, so the Mitteler Rebbe was saying Chassidus outside on the Chatzir, and he got out of his wagon and he watched it. And he saw all of these men, hundreds of people standing and listening, and they didn't move a muscle for hours. So when they tried the Mitteler Rebbe as a common thief, they brought in this Habenthal, a goy, as a testimony, as a witness, a character witness. And the Habenthal said to the judge, I saw this with my eyes. And this man was talking philosophy, mysticism, deep stuff. And for hours, hundreds of men didn't move a muscle. He said, there's no way a person who's so intellectually engaged, there's no way a person who's so intellectually engaged could be a crook. It can't be. He testified on the Mitteler Rebbe's behalf that it's not shaykh that a person was litazayim was that not only he's into it, but he has so many students who he raised up to such a high level. There's just no way such a person could be about to stealing money, and it helped the Mitteler Rebbe. But this is really if you want to know the apple of the Mitteler Rebbe's eye, it was Chassidus, Chabad, Seichel, and that his Chassidim should be raised up on his level and so on. I want you to know there's expressions about the Mitteler Rebbe that are really uncomfortable. The Friedrich Rebbe said about the Mitteler Rebbe is moichin very kenders. The brain of the Mitteler Rebbe, you don't understand what kind of brain it was. You don't understand what it means, a brain. You know what the Rebbe's Rishimas are? They know what the Rebbe's Rishimas are? It's called Rishimas HaYuman. The Rebbe wrote things the Friedrich Rebbe told him in private. In private. And in those Rishimas, which are now published more than once, the Friedrich Rebbe says to our Rebbe, you can't compare the Mitteler Rebbe to Tzemach Tzedek. You just can't. The Tzemach Tzedek was very great. But the Friedrich Rebbe almost says it in words. He wasn't the Mitteler Rebbe. The Friedrich Rebbe tells our Rebbe in private, and now all of us can read it. And I can show it to you black and white. You just can't compare it. What do we know about the Rebbe's? But the Friedrich Rebbe tells our Rebbe, you cannot compare the Tzemach Tzedek to the Rebbe. It's another level. The Mitteler Rebbe's greatness was just not in this world. Now, believe me, I don't want to start off with the Tzemach Tzedek. But the Friedrich Rebbe says to our Rebbe in private, it wasn't in a sikha, that you just cannot compare the Tzemach Tzedek with it. a whole other level. Now, have you ever learned Tzemach Tzedek Chassidus? I have. It knocks you over. The man knew the whole title, like you know how many fingers you have, and the Friedrich Rebbe says, he was no Mitteler Rebbe. So who was the Mitteler Rebbe? We have no idea what kind of brain this neshama had, this Yid had. And he gave till he raised up these people. You cannot say they were on his level. They were not on his level. But he He gave them Chassidus in such a way that physical human beings understood godliness to such an extent it's the only thing they care about. Be'emes. Yesterday one of the girls asked me about the Shalom Beis of the Mitteler Rebbe's Chassidim, and I said to her, I don't know much, but I don't think we want to go there. They really were completely engrossed in that world. They were not here, they were there. Now, I spent too much time on this conversation. I got 10 minutes more, 9 minutes more. I want to talk about one more thing about the Mitteler Rebbe, which is also interesting. The Mitteler Rebbe was Chabad. It was Chabad. Chochma bin das. Use your brain, understand. But you also know that Chabad is not philosophy, Chabad is Chassidus. It means the point of understanding in your brain is to feel in your heart. But the Mitteler Rebbe had a shita, and it was in an extreme way, that you were not allowed to show any emotion. Feel emotion, yeah. Feel emotion like you're about to, like you're Mount Helen, California, one of these big volcanoes. But you have to hold it. The Mitteler Rebbe had fight got the spoilers. He couldn't take when Chassidim got excited. There's a whole long story with the Berditchever. The Berditchever wanted the Mitteler Rebbe to take Chassidus, and the Mitteler Rebbe said, you're going to start screaming, and the Berditchever promised to keep quiet. So the Mitteler Rebbe started, in the middle of the Berditchever starts jumping and screaming, and the Mitteler Rebbe was a very collected person. Shut! Don't make noise! Just calm down. Calm down and listen. And his whole derech was on the spoilers. He showed no emotion. None. The Rebbe by Fabrengen, there's actually a picture of it. Have you seen a picture of the Rebbe doing this? There's a photo of the Rebbe doing this. There's a video also. Anybody seen a picture of the Rebbe doing like this? Yes. You know what that picture is? He's describing the Mitteler Rebbe's shtreimel. The Rebbe kept his hands under the table. He raised his hand in the middle of the sikh and he put like this. The Mitteler Rebbe wore a shtreimel of some tzedeks. It was fur and had a very tall yarmulke. Some tzedek is wearing a shtreimel, but the shtreimel usually has a flat middle.
Was it white?
The first three Rabbeim, Shabbos and Yom Tov wore white, or in the week they wore black. The Alter Rebbe, the Mitteler Rebbe, Tzemach Tzedek, and Shabbos and Yom Tov always wore white. The Rebbe Marash sometimes, the Rebbe Rashab not at all, but the Rabbeim wore white. So if the Shabbos and Yom Tov was white, if it was week it was black. So the shtreimel was pointy. So the Rebbe said that Yom Kippur in the afternoon, between Mincha and Ne'ilah, the Mitteler Rebbe would sit down. And he would fold his hands like this. Fold his hands like this. And he would sit motionless in meditation. So the Rebbe said, the Mitteler Rebbe had a spitzige shtreimel, a pointed shtreimel. And he would sit without any motion, no motion at all. Und von spitz shtreimel hat gerunnen, schweift wie a brunnen. We speak Yiddish. And for the tip of that shtreimel, sweat was spilling out like it was a faucet. Like a spigot. It was poured sweat. Have you ever sweat? Or you say in America, have you sweated? Yeah. It's perspired. It comes on your skin. It cools you off. The Mitteler Rebbe didn't budge. And the concentration was so intense that he was perspiring like a fountain. This was the Mitteler, but he showed no emotion, none. On the outside by the Mitteler Rebbe, you saw zero emotion, no emotion. Now, the story that's uncomfortable, this is a story the Chassidim say. The Mitteler Rebbe chose Shamashim who were big idiots. They were fools. The people who took care of the house were not smart. And it was by design, because if you're not smart, you can't repeat what you see, you don't know what you're looking at. Anyway, but these Shamashim were not particularly bright. So for a couple of dollars, they'd let you see the Mitteler Rebbe. So you go to the Sham, here's 10 ruble, I want to see the Rebbe. You take it to the Mitteler Rebbe's room. Mitteler Rebbe is standing in the middle of the room. Standing. Facing away from the door. The Shamish goes over to the Mitteler Rebbe, picks him up under the arms, poof, turns him around so the Chassid can see him. And the Chassid, what are you doing? He says, don't worry, he has no idea what's going on. He'd pick him up, turn him around, and the Mitteler Rebbe is standing, and he's in another world. He has no idea. And you get your fill. I don't know exactly what you've done, but you picture you took click. You pick him up, turn him back around, you walk out, and the Mitteler Rebbe had no idea. None. His dveikis, when he would go into these dveikis dates, and the Shamashim, they didn't appreciate it, that's nit cheretz, he was not here. But he demanded it from his Chassidim. Chassidim and the Mitteler Rebbe would get excited, he would be merachik. I mean, we need excitement. The more excitement we have, the more likely we're going to take it seriously. The Mitteler Rebbe wanted excitement, but it should be completely on the inside. And this was his shita. No emotion. Now, he had a competitor. The Mitteler Rebbe had a competition. His competition was of Adonai Levi Horowitz of Strasheller. He was a Talmud of the Alter Rebbe. He was a very big tzaddik and a very big god. He was a very big, he spent Chabad Chassidus. But he was incredibly emotional. So the Mitteler Rebbe and the Strasher were opposites in how they looked. And what's weird about it is, the Alter Rebbe looked more like the Strasher than the Mitteler Rebbe. Alter Rebbe used to roll on the floor in the Chassidus. Alter Rebbe used to hit his hand into the wall when he davened, his hands bled. So Bechitzonius, the Strasher was more like the Alter Rebbe than the Mitteler Rebbe was. The Rebbe Rashab has Sichas where he explains why by the Alter Rebbe there was Hispoilus, or the Mitteler Rebbe there wasn't. But the Mitteler Rebbe showed no Hispoilus, none at all. And Chassidim would get excited. The Mitteler Rebbe was Poshet Merachek them. Go away, I can't hear them. No noise. Shah. So you had these people whose brain was full of Chassidus. And Chassidus is not just Torah, which is also incredible, but it was Avodah, connection to the Eibishter, and all on the outside you were not allowed to see anything. So here's the story with the exception to this rule. That the Mitteler Rebbe traveled. And he came to some town on Purim. Let's say it was the city of Kremenchuk. I don't know if it was. It wasn't, probably wasn't, but why not? But who cares? He came to a shtetl, a city, not a shtetl, a shtetl. And he spent Purim there. So, they had a big shul, and they prepared a place for the Mitteler Rebbe. They gave him a lot of covet and the whole business. And when it came Purim, they told the Mitteler Rebbe that there are several Balakiyah, several people who know how to read the Megillah. Who should they put up? And they listed who the Balakiyah were: Shlomo and Chaim and Beryl and Moshe. One of the Balakiyah that they proposed was a Chassid of the Alter Rebbe, who was a poor Malamed. But he knew how to read, he knew Diktuk, he knew how to read. So the Mitteler Rebbe said, let the Malamed, the Alter Rebbe's Chassid, the Malamed, he should read the Megillah. Fine. So the shul full of people, and the Mitteler Rebbe came to shul, and the guys read the Megillah. In the middle of the Megillah, you have that pasuk where Haman boasts to himself, right? Achashverosh says to Haman, what should be done to a man the king wishes to honor? So the next pasuk says, Haman says to himself, of course he means me, who else? Right? Whom does the king wish to honor? Little did he know that it was his arch enemy Mordechai, but Haman is thinking, the king wants to become a person, it's got to be me. So this Chassidish Malamed read this pasuk, and he couldn't control himself. Imagine the king asks you, what should I do a person I wish to honor? And the guy thinks it must be me. So he shouted out, the Mitteler Chassidus, the Mitteler Megillah, Feh, Klippe, Geibe, Feh, couldn't control himself. The room was shocked. Because by the Mitteler Rebbe, that was like the worst Aveda. Anyway, the Megillah finished. They finished Ma'ariv, the Mitteler Rebbe left, and everybody was sure, without a shadow of a doubt, that the next day you're getting somebody else. The Mitteler Rebbe is not letting a man who can't quote control himself. He's never such a big chassid that in the middle of the Megillah he has to scream out about Haman that he's fat klipa. No way. It comes the next morning, they come to shul, and they go over to the Mitteler Rebbe and say, who should learn today? She said, I don't understand the question. We put something last night. He said they didn't. They don't want to. Well, Rebbe, he showed his spoilers. And we know you don't like his spoilers. It was a surprise. So he went to lane, and of course the next day, Mr. Dame, he didn't shout it again. So there's a Jewish cost to give Megillah geld. To give the Balkiyah money. It's a minute. And the Mitteler Rebbe put down a golden handle, a gold coin, like $100 or $1,000, a lot of money. Completely beyond the tip that you would don't believe about Balkiyah. In that shul that day, there were 100 rich people. And each one said, how can the Rebbe outdo me? Each one put down a golden handle, and in one day this man became rich. In one day this man became rich, reading the Megillah and screaming out Fekhlip. And the Mitteler Rebbe said later, I would never tolerate a person's spoilers like he did last night. He said, but he had a bracha for the Alter Rebbe for Ashiris. This man, this Malamed, had a bracha for my father to be rich. And he didn't make a keli. So the bracha wasn't going to happen. And I didn't want my father's bracha to go to waste. So I suffered the indignity of a guy showing his spoilers. The Mitteler Rebbe said, I let him lane so I could give him a lot of money so he should become rich. So my father's bracha to be Mekoyim. That's the story of the Mitteler Rebbe. Okay, I will see you Thursday. Okay.